So I thought it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about what it is that we already know about mental health. Clearly, there's a lot of research already taking place, and Anneleen is one prolific researcher in this area. So I invited Anneleen to tell us a little bit about her research into the state of mental health in academia. So Anneleen, the floor is yours, and I think you can share your slides if you like. Yeah.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you also from me for being part of this very special day, the launch of the survey, and I also look very much forward to how the survey will be spread and the results of the survey. And now I will try to share my presentation. And I hope it's visible to everyone. Yes, thank you for giving us short feedback. Okay, so I am Anneleen Mortier, and I'm also delighted to talk to you about researchers' well-being and career development. And I also want to credit my colleagues, which are Katja Levesque and Lien Wille. Yes, okay, so before diving into the presentation and about mental health and well-being, I will give a bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from and where this research takes place. So I work at ECOOM, and that is the Expertise Center for Research and Development Monitoring. This includes all of the 5 Flemish universities of Belgium. So here you see Belgium, and the red part is Flanders. So we monitor everything R&D related in Flanders. At Ghent University, we focus on the careers of PhD candidates and of PhD holders. So we look into questions like, how does a PhD training look like? Are PhD candidates sufficiently prepared for future careers? Are there several leverages during the doctoral training, or are there a couple of hurdles? How do the careers of doctorate holders look like? Is a PhD an added value on a non-academic labor market? And so on. So those are all questions we try to answer with our research. Our research is very much policy oriented. So we report to the Flemish Minister of Work, Economics, Innovation and Agriculture. And we also report to a various amount of Flemish stakeholders who are involved in research and economics, such as the Flemish government, but also our local funding agency, which is the FWO. So we have a different way of communicating. It's much more policy oriented, and we're not as much focused on scientific A1 publications. Now, when we do publish, people might know about the publications. So this is one by Katja Levesque. I think most of you know this publication. It was published in 2017 in Research Policy. Just in a nutshell, this article shows evidence that PhD candidates have a higher chance of having or developing a mental health problem, and also in comparison to the general highly educated population. So after this article was published, it kind of went viral. It was picked up by PhD students, by everyone almost in academia. And it was also picked up by other websites. And they published blog articles such as this one. So is doing a PhD bad for your mental health? Then Nature published something about the mental health of PhD researchers demands urgent attention. And others, such as this one, what can universities do to support the well-being and mental health of postgraduate researchers? And this last one raises the questions where many universities are now thinking of, or many policymakers. So what can we do to support well-being and mental health of PhD students? Now, before looking into that, we must first look at well-being. So what comes to your mind when you think about well-being? Well-being is mostly used as some kind of umbrella term that fits all kind of aspects. And there are 2 main categories. So we have the job outcomes and we have health outcomes. And when we look at job outcomes, we have several aspects such as job satisfaction, turnover intentions, and absenteeism or presenteeism, so being ill and going to work, or becoming ill because of work. Then you have health outcomes, and those have several aspects, such as your general health, your mental health, physical health, and also burnout. Now, when you look at this, we have an assumption that all of those aspects are kind of highly correlated with each other. And that means that people think that there is like a spillover effect between the two. So the idea is, as a university, when you target, for example, job satisfaction, that this might also affect other well-being aspects. So is this truly the case? Does it all come together and blend as one whole concept? So for this presentation, we will look into 3 aspects of well-being, which are job satisfaction, turnover intentions, and mental health. Now, the data that I will be presenting is the data of the PhD candidates in Flanders. So everyone, a junior researcher who's doing a PhD in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. We used 3 questions. So the first for job satisfaction is, how satisfied are you with your job in general? For turnover intentions, we looked at, or we asked them, how often do you think about quitting your job? And then for mental health, we used the GHQ4+, which is also the same instrument that Katja used in her publication in Research Policy. And here people have to have at least 4 or more symptoms to have a risk of having or developing a mental health problem. Now, we had quite an extensive model to test this, and I will walk you through this because there are lots of variables on this slide. So what we included was 3 main things in the model. So we used work context, organizational context, and socio-demographics. Now, for work context, we looked at job demands. So we asked questions like, are the demands for your, so the demands for your job are high, like you have to work constantly, or you don't have a lot of breaks, or you have to work overtime in the weekend, and so on. Then we have job control, and that's the amount of control you have to organize your job. So if you have flexible working hours, or you can organize your own work. The next thing in the model was inspirational leadership style, and this was the leadership style of the promoter or the PI of the PhD candidate. And that is this type of leadership is how someone can inspire the PhD candidate and who also helps him or her to develop further. We also looked at if someone had a high interest in an academic career, whether the PhD candidate had the perception of a high chance of an academic career. We also looked at if they had a positive perception of a career outside of academia. We included science cluster, so that would be humanities, social sciences, exact sciences, applied sciences, and biomedical sciences. Then we had type of appointment. So if someone has teaching obligations, if someone was working on a research project, or if someone had a personal grant. Then PhD phase was also included, which was the starting phase, executing phase, and finishing phase. Now, for organizational context, we included 3 variables. So the first one is closed decision-making in a team. So whether a decision is being done by one person or just a select group of people. Then we had family-work conflict and work-family conflict. Family-work conflict means that things at home interfere with your work. For example, you have to take care of a sick child at home, but you also still have to work. While work-family conflict is the other way around. So things in your work interfere with your home obligations. So before, for example, you have to work overtime and you don't have a lot of relaxing time or family time. And then, of course, the usual suspects as the socio-demographics, so gender, age, whether someone has a partner or not, or whether someone had children or not. Okay, so this is the model. We tested this for mental health, job satisfaction, and turnover intentions. So we have green blocks and red blocks. The red bars or the red blocks are risk factors. So that means that if these variables are high, it will increase mental health problems, decrease job satisfaction, and increase turnover intentions. And the green bars are the leverages. So when these are high, it will decrease mental health, increase job satisfaction, and decrease turnover intentions. So for mental health, we see that if the job demands are high, if there is a close decision-making in the team, if there is family work conflict and work family conflict, and if you're a woman, then you have a higher chance to have or develop mental health problems. Now for leverages, so things that can buffer the mental health problems, we see that a high amount of job control, an inspirational leader, if you have lots of interest in an academic career, if you have a high chance or you perceive yourself to have a high chance of an academic career and a positive perception. Oh no, I was wrong. So we have a high interest in an academic career, and if you have a positive perception of a career outside academia, then these would decrease the chance of having or developing a mental health. Then for PhD phase, we could see that the starting phase versus the execution phase, so you can see it on the bottom left, that if you are in the starting phase, it's a leverage. So you have less chance of having or developing mental health problems compared to people who were in the execution phase. Next, for job satisfaction, we kind of see a similar pattern for work context variables. However, in the organizational context, we see a difference. Here, family work conflict is no longer significant in the model. And also the socio-demographics differ. So here, age is actually a block or would decrease. So the older you get, the less the job satisfaction people reported. And also for a partner here was significant in the sense that if people had a partner, then they had a higher chance of having a higher job satisfaction. And then lastly, for turnover attention, again, for work context, it's quite a similar pattern, except for the PhD phase. And here we see that both 1 and 2 are significant. So the starting people in the starting phase had more or less chance of turnover intentions compared to execution phase, people in the execution phase, and the same for the finishing phase. And then for organizational context, we again see a different pattern compared to the other elements of well-being. And here only work-family conflict was a risk factor. So now besides the impact well-being can have in the PhD track, there is also possibility that what is happening in the PhD track might have an impact in the later careers. And now I will look at aspects of the careers of PhD holders, so people who already have obtained their PhD. And here we look at precariousness, work-life balance, and workload. So satisfaction with work-life balance and satisfaction with workload. So here I have defined 3 groups of the PhD holders. So we have people who are working in a non-academic context, we have postdoctoral researchers, and we have professors. And if we look at so fixed contracts, so PhD holders who have a fixed term contract, then we see, of course, 9% of the postdocs has a fixed contract, fixed term contract, which is of course not surprising. We kind of know that this is going on, and that postdoctoral position is quite precarious. But also here we see that for professors, the share who have a fixed term contract is also significantly lower compared to the PhD holders who work outside of academia. For satisfaction with workloads, which is also one of the key predictors in the model of well-being, we also see that there's a difference between the 3 groups. So here, professors, the share who are satisfied is actually significantly lower compared to the shares of postdocs and the shares of non-academic PhD holders. And then lastly, satisfaction with work-life balance. Here we see actually the same pattern as workload. Here again, professors, so the share of people who are satisfied with their work-life balance is significantly lower compared to the satisfied postdocs and the satisfied PhD holders working in a non-academic work environment. So to wrap up this presentation and what I just presented to you, we saw that well-being has different components. So we have work aspects and we have job aspects, and that different predictors might influence these components differently. And we have also the idea about what if we want to implement something as a policy or as a university, and we want to tackle something on well-being, we should think first about the entire concept. So what is well-being and what indicator of well-being do we want to tackle? Because there is a possibility that not all of the aspects of well-being will be handled or will be covered by your implication or by your implementation in the policy. But it also can be the case that if you want to positively influence something, it can be negatively influenced by other well-being aspects. And then lastly, we should also think about the culture. So the PhD track might potentially set the tone for later academic culture. When PhD candidates experience several work aspects as negatively, the chances are quite high that this will remain in later academic careers. So for example, when PhD students are not very satisfied with their workload, and that also affects their well-being, there is a possibility that as a professor, they still won't be so satisfied with their workload. And also on top of that, the workload might even be increased because we know for professors, more tasks and more duties come. So yeah, it can be that this sets the tone further on. And also, of course, professors are an academic role model for PhD students. So the way that they might be managing or receiving the work might be also an example for PhD students. So I'm come to the end of my very short presentation before now going into the exciting part of this meeting. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them right now. However, if you feel like you have other questions after this presentation, you can always contact me using these credentials right here. And now I will close this presentation so I can see you all again. Thank you.
Great. Anneleen, I actually thought your presentation was quite exciting as well. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the chat and I see a question by Barbara, who says, the predictors explain 20% in mental health. Any ideas which are the other predictors that explain the 80% that your comprehensive model could not explain?
Yeah, so for our field, so for social sciences, 20% is quite exciting that we have so much variance that can be explained by the model. Of course, it's quite an extensive model. We have lots of variables in there. But yeah, of course, indeed, 80% is still unpredicted, but there are like lots of possibilities. They can be personality, there can be personal variables, there can even more be contextual variables, which we did not take into account. So yeah, lots of possibilities are still out there, of course.
Yeah, I think this R² is a notable depressing statistic in that it's always very, very low. When I've seen publications with an R² of 5% make a big deal of the outcome. So I would say 20% is pretty good. Any other questions for Anneleen before we move on? No, I cannot. Oh, there's a hand. Irina,
yes.
Welcome.
Thank you, Anneleen, for an exciting presentation. I was surprised with the percentage of fixed contracts among postdocs. 9%, it's quite a few. I was expected that 99% would be fixed contracts. How my understanding was wrong. How do you interpret this number?
Okay, so fixed contract is a permanent contract, like you have a fixed position, and yeah, so not normally for postdocs, temporary job contract is quite, yeah,
I see.
the norm, I would say. So yeah, we have 9, which is quite, I think, large compared to other countries. That could be because some are lab trainers or have some specific statute as a postdoctoral researcher, but most of them, of course, are very much temporary.
Thank you.
Great. Another question by Anthony.
Hello, thank you, Anneleen, for your presentation. I was wondering, like drawing on the other research that you've been doing and other the policy papers that you've been working on, like what can you draw or what can you build upon these results to recommend in terms of policies that universities can take to improve whether the job satisfaction or the mental health? I know it's a very big question, but I wonder if like there are like 1 or 2 key points that you see are great recommendations for institutions to apply, or I don't know how broad or how feasible it is to answer such a question.
Oh, I think you can take this as broad or as narrow as possible. I think if you want to have a very concrete or specific answer, it's quite difficult to answer because it all depends on the policy context and the way everything is organized in the universities. As I think about a broader answer, I would say that first we might think about the PhD training itself. So what should it be? Because now it's somewhere in between academic training and, of course, people go non-academic, so we have to prepare them, but it's not really ingrained now in the training. So I would first recommend this, like what do we want them to know? What does the training have to be to get them both in academia as a good professor with good leadership qualities to take care of other people as well, because now that kind of also is more difficult, but also with reflection on non-academic careers, like, okay, so how can we make sure that the skills and the things that people need are also ingrained in, or encoded in the doctoral training as well. I was thinking about something else, but I kind of forgot, but I see Gabor, maybe you have an addition to this. Or is it a question?
No, it's more a comment that last week I was at the Pride summer school. Pride is professionals in doctoral education. And there, the topic of the summer school was like why the last few months of a PhD training or a PhD route is so stressful. And something very interesting happened because we started discussing this last month of the process. And very quickly we realized the best way to fix the problems at the end to focus on the beginning. To really start thinking about what makes a healthy process. What are the ingredients of a nice PhD trajectory? How do you welcome these people at your organizations? These are the questions which helped us to answer what to do at the end. So it was a very interesting experience, and it's a lot to talk about, and it sheds light on the importance of training and the importance of welcoming people in academic work environments.
Yeah, I think also about setting the expectations for PhD students or prospective PhD students, also setting expectations for professors, making them aware as well. And I think also opening up the professorship corps, or how do I say, that not only that there is also a possibility of people from outside of academia who can return or who can even become professor, because now that's quite difficult, I would say, because you don't have any publications if you go to a non-academic organization. But if we would allow more diversity, it can also benefit science and PhD training and universities and so on.
Yeah, so maybe tying into this, I think here at the University of Amsterdam, there's a policy in place that actually encourages PhDs to leave the nest, if you will, and to fly out to other universities. But at the same time, I think that creates a lot of anxiety and precarity. So I think there may also be an obligation on the part of organizations to provide some kind of career support, post-PhD career support in helping people land in a good place after their PhD projects. I suspect there's also too little of that taking place. But Irina, you've had your hand up for a while.
You're muted.
Your microphone, Irina.
Excuse me. You said, Anneleen, that well-being is an umbrella term, but another umbrella term is burnout. And I'm very concerned with it because now I have to deal with it in different areas. And students invited me in the University of Lausanne at a panel to discuss it. But I am quite embarrassed. The happy news that it will be just after the survey sending, so I can promote it directly. But the embarrassing thing that according to WHO, burnout is an occupational phenomenon and should not be discussed outside of work. So who are students and PhD students? The postdoctoral researchers are working under the work contract, but PhD are not always workers. So should we consider them? I just want to be strict with the definition and not enter, a slippery path with using the term and with preparing my intervention. So what is your insight, how we should deal with it? Should we speak about something much broader and not specifically burnout, or are we allowed really to speak about burnout in PhD students?
Oh, I am not really a burnout expert, but I would say that well, here in Belgium, they have a mixed. They're both students, but they're also employees. So, if you would look at the term, it has to be work related. Then I think legally, it should be covered as in okay. So they are employees and they do work. However, I think the definition about what is work is also maybe interesting to look at, because I think, but I'm not quite sure, that burnout is also now prevailing in high school students, so that they feel pressure to study and perform. And so if you use that definition, they're also not really employees, but it seems that they experience something that looks like burnout. So yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I don't think I see any more hands up for the time being. And I guess that means we can slowly progress with the second part of the